everybody. Welcome to another edition of my interview with my colleagues in yoga therapy who are trained in the Swastha yoga therapy program. So, every so often, I am doing some interviews with my colleagues, so you'll get to know the full spectrum of how Swastha yoga therapy and yoga therapy has applied their therapeutic tools to solving issues with our clients as a client base, as a collective client base. So this week, this video, we have a interview with John Poole. John is a retired Air Force veteran and former registered nurse with a background in biology and clinical care. After stepping away from nursing from the impact of chronic stress and PTSD, he shifted his focus towards integrative approaches to health and recovery. So he now works at that intersection of yoga therapy, somatics, breath work, drawing from formal training in the Swastha Yoga Therapy program. His experiences include leading exercise programs for healthy adults and cancer survivors, where he integrates principles from the yoga therapy work, the studies, physical therapy, and movement science to support safe and sustainable progress. John's work is shaped not only by his professional background, but by his own ongoing experience navigating nervous system deregulation. He brings a practical, grounded perspective to helping others build regulation, resilience, and a more stable relationship with their bodies and minds. So I hope you enjoy this wisdom on the solutions to PTSD using yoga therapy. Thanks, everyone. So we're here with John, and welcome, John, to this channel of yoga therapy. So nice to see you here. We are both colleagues in the Swastha Pathline for yoga therapy, and we're going to talk about your strong point, which is PTSD. And I would love it if you would just start right now with just describing what that is, so we're all on the same baseline.
Sure. Yeah. So part of I have a unique perspective because I worked in the clinical field as a nurse, and then I also have PTSD from multiple aspects of my life, which is both a blessing and a curse. I was served in the military and then had some health issues after the military. So I have what's called bipronged post-traumatic stress disorder. So I have it from multiple different aspects, which is actually common. Most people from my perspective, from seeing it through my own eyes and in a clinical environment, I think everyone suffers from post-traumatic stress. I think we have shifted in the medical awareness community of lumping people into boxes of saying you either have a condition or you don't have a condition. Now we're starting to learn that most conditions exist on a spectrum, whereas like post-traumatic stress disorder, almost everyone in their life has encountered a stressful event that has triggered a stress response that is too much for the brain.
Yes.
Whereas some people have more extenuous experiences and some people have less. And so everyone has suffered from a traumatic, stressful event, but
Right.
whether the body and the brain responds to that in a future moment is up to the individual. So to give a little understanding
Yeah,
clinically about.
I was just going to say exactly what I think what you were where you were heading. I was going to say just to get everyone on the same wavelength of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what our topic is, and then you segued right into that with your comment about the fact this is something I really want all people to understand is that post-traumatic stress has been redefined by the medical community. And on the other hand, you and I are singing the song that everyone on the planet has stress and the trauma that ensues from that is how the body is responding to that stress. So please go there and then let's circle back to other stuff.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I hope to kind of touch on it from different angles throughout the talk, but really the stigmatism of post-traumatic stress is that you have this erroneous response to a stressful event. And that is a stigma. It's actually not true. You have a survival response to a stressful event. Your body, like someone who grew up in a stressful environment as a child, They learned adaptation response. They learned responses to adapt to a stressful environment. In the yoga field and yoga philosophy, we call those samskaras. We call those learned patterns of behaviors. When you move out of a stressful event, whether it's a war zone or a catastrophic relationship at home or a car wreck or anything, your body has a survival response to that threat. And then whether or not your body can rebalance and recalibrate is up to your system. It's not really a choice. Some people don't rebalance and recalibrate. And so when anything triggers that same response, whether it's a smell, whether it's something that they see, it's a sensory engagement that re-triggers that response from a threat, then you're stuck in what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. And so there's four different parts of the brain, three different parts of the brain and the nervous system itself. So what happens is you have the prefrontal cortex in the front of your brain, which is kind of your critical thinking. Um, that's the apparatus that sees things, processes things, and has you make the ability to choose a response in situations. That normally develops throughout the teenage years, and most people, it stops developing in their 20s. It's fully matured in their 20s. So if you have a stressful event before this part of the brain is fully developed, it didn't respond properly to it. But what happens in post-traumatic stress disorders, you have another part of your brain in the very back. It's a little small part of what's called the primitive brain. It's the amygdala. The amygdala's sole purpose is threat response and survival. So you have these
Kind of
two.
like a flight and fright type of,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, it's the part of your brain. It is what's called the reptilian brain. There's a little part of your brain that, evolutionary speaking, developed millennia ago,
Right.
and its sole purpose is to respond to threats. So, with post traumatic stress disorder, you have the critical thinking apparatus and you have the threat response apparatus. What happens is this apparatus in your brain, the amygdala, takes over. And if it dysregulates, this part of your brain overcompensates for this part of your brain. So now you're stuck in a cycle where you're constantly scanning for threats, even when there's not a threat around.
So
And
your
you're not,
chitta vritti is always in the fright
yes,
or flight mode, and
yes,
you're stuck in that. Yeah. Okay, good.
correct. So thinking about those two kind of, what should happen in a normal response is that, say we're hunter gatherers and we're in the woods and we hear something in the bushes,
Yeah.
this little part of our brain says that might be a lion. We need to run. And so we run. Then we get out of the situation and the critical thinking part of the brain takes back over. Maybe it was a lion, maybe it was the wind, but I don't see anything now. We're safe.
Right.
And post-traumatic stress disorder, this part of the brain, the threat response brain, overcompensates and shuts down this part of the brain. Now, what we know from neurology and modern neuroscience is that there's the phrase, I'm sure everyone's heard it in some way, um, neurons that fire together wire together, and it's
Right.
called neuroplasticity as well. The brain
Buzzword
responds.
these days, right? It's a buzz.
Yes, yes.
Everybody's buzzed
Both
around with
words.
that.
But there's truth to it. If this part of the brain continuously starts to fire and continuously is responding to threats,
Right.
it adapts. It says, oh,
Right.
well, this is the part of the brain that needs to be used all the time,
Right.
not this critical thinking. I need to be continuously aware of all these threats. And so
Yeah.
that's what happens in post-traumatic stress disorder is, at some point on that spectrum, and a stressful event occurs, and the balance between critical thinking and threat response gets thrown off to where
Yeah.
the threat response is the primary driver in the brain.
Right. So you're kind of like you're thinking about life, your lens through which you're looking at life is patterned to detect things to save you, self-protection. So it's always about what is my next chittavritti that will cause me to need to get under cover and protect myself, rather than the flip, which is happy, happy, happy until, hey, there's something I don't understand, which is what you would want. That's what you want. There's something I don't understand. I'm going to process it rather than saying, no, no, I got to process everything and I'm never going to be safe. So that's like the flip of that, right? Did I get that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so, and thinking more about the brain exists solely to preserve itself in the body.
Yeah.
It's a mechanism of, so kind of
Survival.
getting, Yes, it's a survival organ. It commands and directs the entire processes of the body, and then it serves to protect itself. And so if
Yeah.
what I've learned is that a lot of people grow up in situations where they have stressful environments at home. Modern life has thrown off the balance of having a successful childhood for a lot of people.
In
And
air quotes,
yes, yes,
successful, meaning
yes,
non-provoked or non-creating a, again, air quotes, safe environment in the sense that a child can grow without being threatened at some level. And I think you might be referring to also the outside world, the access to outside world. Ages ago, we didn't have that instant info that creates that it's unsafe. That's how children are growing because the information that their brain is getting is constantly it's not safe. So,
correct. Yeah. And so this is kind of almost a conditioned response, and then you adapt to those patterns. You
yeah,
learn life isn't safe or that I'm not safe, and so you learn I have to constantly scan. I have to constantly be worried about when my next meal is going to come, or if it's safe to go home, or if it's, so it's a safety response. And what that does is it pushes the nervous system into what's called sympathetic dominance. We have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest nervous system. Then we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is what I think Dr. Mohan called it's a mobility response, which we call fight, flight, or freeze. When your sympathetic nervous system gets activated, it floods your system with hormones so that you can either run away, so you can engage a threat, or some people shut down, they completely freeze. And what's interesting about post traumatic stress disorder is if that part of your brain is constantly running, that threat response brain is constantly
right.
running, what I just said is your body gets flooded with hormones. So your body is continuously getting flooded with these hormones. So then you have hormonal dysregulation as well. So then it bleeds over into other parts of the body. And that's what's, for me, is interesting about post traumatic stress disorders. It's not only a psychological disorder, it's a physiological disorder. There are other parts of your body. So
Well,
this may
body,
bleed.
mind, so you're looking at the whole yoga apparatus of body, mind, and
Absolutely.
then your intuitive skills. But I just want to, this is a great train of thought. I just want to circle back 1 second and go rewind a little bit and ask about the first time you had discovered that. So you touched a little bit about your history of how you got to this topic. So being an expert, having lived through it, and having been a yoga therapist dealing with that yourself and your clients. But let's go to this point where you discovered that these practices, this yoga therapy world, we won't go to define specifically, but we can talk about what was the point where you discovered these practices could be powerful tools to deal with supporting nervous system healing and emotional safety? Like, how did you come to that, and what was that first moment?
Sure. So I got out of the military in 2010, and I had traumatic experiences overseas in the military. And then when I got out, a couple of months after I got out of the military, I had a severe health trauma. My right lung collapsed, and I was in the ICU for about 2.5 weeks on IVs and had multiple surgeries. All this stemming from the military. So not only was I needed to recalibrate and adjust to civilian life, then immediately I have this traumatic health experience. So it took a couple of years for me to kind of traverse back to stability from all of that. And when I was in college, from 2010 to probably about 2016, 16 or 17 was when I had a neighbor who gave me BKS Iyengar's Light on Yoga. And
Yes.
he said, I think you would really enjoy this book. And so it's funny, I'm actually sitting in my car in the neighborhood that I lived in when I was in college. The university,
Wow.
the
Circling
university
back.
Yes, yes, it's interesting. The university is about 10 minutes down the street, and then my house was about maybe 2 or 3 minutes this way. And as a science major, you have science classes, and then usually the labs for the classes are an hour or two later. So one of my chemistry classes, my class was at 11 and my lab was at 3. And so I would just drive home, and all the while I'm dealing with the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, these 6 7 years. Friend gives me this book, and I say, okay, I'll try it. And so I come home and I read part of the book. And if you're familiar with the book, most of the book is the pictures of the asanas and step by steps. But in the back, there's I think it's a 52-week
Yes.
like program of how to incorporate the asanas. And so I started that, and I pretty much taught myself from his book.
Great.
And I noticed, and this is the kicker with people want big changes. They think when things happen, there's this big aha moment, and
Aha. And the world separates out into the
yes,
divide.
and it's not that way. But what I noticed was subtle shifts. When I was in class, I was calm. After I had practiced yoga and I went back to my lab, I felt better.
Wow.
And it wasn't like this aha moment. I would be taking notes in class and I would realize my chest isn't tight. My neck isn't tight. I'm not scanning the room. And it was just these little changes. And it took a couple of weeks for me to connect the two, like, oh, maybe I'm just having a good day or a good week. And then slowly, as I continued practicing, I was like, wait, there's a connection here. This all kind of started when I was going home and practicing yoga in between classes for an hour
Yeah.
or so.
That's
And then,
amazing. It's amazing how because I think from a yoga therapist point of view, and I think you're thinking the same thing as I am, is that, you know, it's not the thing itself, but it's almost like your body was aching. It was ready. It was like ground was fertile. You had suffered enough, and there were the insides, or what we would call consciousness, to say that, there is another way. Are you ready? And then the book came in to kind of like, here, try this, and your mind was already ready to accept that I need
right.
to get out of this jail that I put myself in. And so that's amazing that that was the tool. So, I was just gonna segue into like you're saying it, but let me just say it formally, is that was there some specific practice that you would that you're like you automatically now, based on that practice, recommend to your clients for PTSD or related such stress disorder symptoms that you would go to? Would you go to some kind of a breath work? Would you go to something specific asana wise, or explain that process a little bit?
So I think if you refer back to kind of the symptomatics that we were talking about the brain, where the threat response overrides critical thinking and the nervous system is thrown into what's sympathetic dominance, where it's constantly ready to move. From what I've gathered through my own personal insights and then through studying with the Svastika yoga therapy program is simple things. The body doesn't respond to intensity in these moments. When you're stressed, when you're anxious or depressed, you don't need to jump into 2 hours of this and 2 hours of that. What for me has made the biggest difference is breath regulation, breath awareness, which comes before breath regulation, slow controlled movement, and pacing. And so what that all adds up to is recentering into your body. So in post-traumatic stress disorder, your body becomes the enemy. The enemy is not really outside, it's the processes that are going on inside of your body. And so we have to come back home to our body in order to give our body and our brain better options. So what I had said earlier is that post-traumatic stress disorder is a survival response. It's not something that we need to root out of our bodies. We just have to figure out, are these responses serving us in this moment? If they're not, let's give our body and our brain better options. And those
Like a
options are,
regulation. Oh, a
yes,
regulation.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And awareness comes first. And that's the simplest thing is just awareness. Oftentimes when someone gets into a panic attack or an anxiety attack, the symptoms that were leading up to a panic and anxiety attack happen 15, 20, 30 minutes before you're aware that you're in a flight or fight response.
Right.
And so if we can reel that in and start to notice fast breath, tight neck, tight shoulders, crunching of our jaw, if we can notice all those things before we get into a panic or anxiety attack, we can mitigate that response, that survival response. Because oftentimes when we get into a panic or an anxiety attack, it's that fight or flight response to a perceived threat that is not actually there.
Right.
And so those three things: breath regulation, slow, controlled movements, and a steady, even pace. We don't need to rush. We don't need to jump up and down and do jumping jacks. We don't need to do handstand push-ups. Just smooth, controlled.
That's the truism of the slowness. I mean that I'm just going to segue into my the next query, which I think everyone is asking themselves when they hear you, is that how do you take a an eruptive body mind? I mean, when you're doing it for yourself, you go, stop. I know what, like you're constantly in contact with the feedback loop of what your body's doing. But when you're training another person, like I can tell you as a trainer, as a yoga therapist, you really have to get that insight into how is my client going to react when I introduce this intervention into their shrinkla of chitta, vritti, samskara cycle that keeps going on. And I have to put that intervention in. We kind of anticipate, okay, like you said, baby steps. But how would you then, take a person that has maybe in the throes of this being their first introduction to this, what this could be that is causing their reaction, and then slowing it down to the deregulation to create that, like what you've got now. You obviously, it's not an overnight. You worked on it and all of this, and you're telling us about your history, and that's not like, you didn't turn on a light bulb. You turned on the light bulb to start the process. And then, so how would you do this? Can you kind of like walk through a process of how you deal with a client who's in the throes of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think education comes first. I think you let the person know that something's not wrong with them. Oftentimes, oftentimes there's stigmas. There's something's wrong with me. I'm broken.
Yes.
It's reinforcing that idea that this was a survival response, or maybe multiple survival responses.
Yes.
I was introduced, a cousin of mine is a psychotherapist in Washington State, and he introduced me to what's called acceptance commitment therapy.
Yes.
And I read a little bit about it. I've never participated in it, but really the name itself, accepting what is going on and
Yes.
committing to a positive change. And so you start with where the person is, and then you let them know nothing's
Yes.
wrong with you. This is just something we
Right.
need to bring back into balance. And
That resonates so well with, both of us have been instructors for a long time. I've been an instructor for a long time. And I know one of the things that I teach when I'm mentoring, one of the things I emphasize is that, and I want everyone who listens to realize that, the whole world is perfect as it is. There's nothing for you to fix. We're not fixing, we're just kind of leading people to where their body mind can be more in concert with who they really are. And that's a point that you just made that I just wanted to emphasize a bit. But go ahead back to your train of thought. Sorry about that.
oh, absolutely. And just to kind of play on what you were saying there, one of my favorite, if people who know me well, I love Ram Dass.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and there's actually a lecture series that I'm listening to. This is the third time I've listened to it. It's from 1974. He gave a talk at Naropa University in Colorado when they opened in the 70s. It's a Buddhist university.
Okay.
He gave a lecture series called The Yogas of the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
And one of the phrases that he mentioned in one of his lectures, which I have held on to and try to see in my own life, is most of our suffering comes from the fact that we rigidly attach to these models of how we think the world should be. That we
Mhm.
build these models of, every situation that we put ourselves in, we conceptually build this model of this is how it's going to be and this is how it should be.
Like
And
the
then
world is a peaceful place, and what's wrong with it? That's where
sure,
everybody
sure.
starts. So when did you know that to be true ever?
Right, exactly. And so every situation we encounter, we often kind of anticipate how it's going to be. And, when we encounter it, it's often not that way. And if
Right.
we have the flexibility to accept that it's not the way we think it is, that's where change happens. That's where,
Yeah,
the
yeah. The
aha moment.
disconnect, that's where we start, right? And I think what you're saying is a global thing. And when people say, okay, that let's go back to our original topic of PTSD, and people think that, oh, it's, a certain category of population And we have just made it clear that everyone probably on the planet has a level of this, especially if you're living in 2026. Hello, we all have PTSD. So I think that the point is, to what degree, I think we're both making that same claim, if I can say, and I want you to comment on this, is we're both making the same claim that, okay, accept that as the baseline. Now, what you have is the delta between how you perceive the world to be, what you just said, and this is a refrain that comes across in yoga therapy a lot. It's the chitta vritti and then the reaction that you see, the manifestation and your samskara cycle, the response to the chitta vritti. And so that, if we can understand how to bring those worlds together and the PTSD manifestation of how you respond to the stressor and your reaction to it, I think that's where we're both headed. So I want you to complete that formulation, and then we'll probably end with some closing remarks.
Sure. So yeah, basically where my mind is going now is to, when you're working with someone, either yourself or as a yoga therapist, if you're working with a client who has, this disorder symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, you're not just dealing with one thing, and that's multimodal. That with almost every disorder, or whatever you want to label, there's layers to everything. So for our topic of discussion, post-traumatic stress disorder, you don't only deal with post-traumatic stress, you're dealing with depression, you're dealing with anxiety, you're dealing with headaches or intestinal issues from flood of cortisol, you're dealing with widespread pain, whether it's fibromyalgia, and so on and so forth. So to say, okay, well, you have post-traumatic stress disorder, let's get you, outside in the sunshine and exercising 3 days a week. Well, that's great, but if you're depressed, you don't have the motivation to do that. And if you're depressed, then you're anxious because now I have this problem that I have to fix. So not only do I have post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm depressed because of it. And now I'm anxious because there's this problem I have to fix, and I don't have the energy to change anything. Not only do that, but I also have this intestinal disability where I can't eat without my belly getting upset because I'm stressed. So there's all these layers. And what we do when we work with someone is we just pick one. We just pick one thing. We start one, and make we make it
Track.
predictable.
We
We
track
show
it.
up, yeah, we track it, and we put them in a predictable environment. So a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder is this feeling of lack of control. At some point, you were encountered in a stressful environment and you felt lack of control. So if you can give someone that piece back, if you can give them a sensibility of control in any aspect, you start there and you build the self-confidence. As a trainer, when you work with someone who hasn't exercised in a while, once they're able to start doing extra things that they weren't able to do when they came in, there's a confidence that starts to, when they show
But
up there.
yeah, for sure. We always start with do something 5 minutes a day. It could be vacuuming your house. It could be walking to get the mail. It could be checking your email for only
Sure.
5 minutes. But,
Yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right. We always start with do a 5-minute practice every day just to get that chitta vritti samskara cycle, a platform on which to play. This is your
Right.
5-minute playground.
Right. Yeah. So it's coming back to that idea that these are survival responses and we don't want to eliminate them. We just want to give our nervous system better options. And awareness starts first. And, we've talked about the samskaras, that they're impressions from past experiences that shape our future behaviors. So if we can recognize those, as you know, we can't deal with the samskaras directly. We can't deal directly with our impressions from past behaviors, but we can create new impressions with new behaviors. And so neuroscience
Break
kind
the
of calls,
cycle, basically, which is
yes, break the
similar.
cycle. The neuroscience talks about conditioning and the pathways of our brain, or predictive feedback. And so yoga therapy and the psychology of the science of yoga and neuroscience, they're coming at it at different angles, but they're coming at the same thing, that you have these pathways in your brain that were programmed at some point. So if they were able to be programmed at some point in the past, They're able to be programmed at some point in the future.
Future.
And
Mhm.
when that is kind of up to the individual, and it takes effort. That's one of the things that I really appreciated about our yoga therapy program is the very first course that we took was habit and change. Habits are
Yes.
sticky, especially if they're survival patterns. They're very, very sticky because we rely on these patterns to survive. And so it's not coming at it, grabbing the bull by the horns and trying to rigidly
Which
force
is
these.
what you were referring to when you said go outside and walk for or do, outside activity exercise for 3 times a week. That's more bull by the horns
Right,
and kind of like head on with the, you've got a problem, you've got to do this. That has to go. And anybody who's been in a classroom ever as a student or as a teacher knows that the way to get the child who's not doing their homework is not to say, do your homework. It's like there's
yeah,
something else going on. So it's the same
yeah,
thing with any kind of disorder, but more so here is that pattern making. And you're saying that the neuroscience vector and the yoga therapy vector kind of, go at it with similar attitudes in the sense that you want to break the cycle and create new patterns.
right. And I think you and I and most of our colleagues are kind of on the same page, if not exactly on the same page, that there's a modernization of the yoga practice has created an industry. And when an industry is created, the sole purpose is to generate people to enjoy it and to generate a revenue from it. And not that that's bad. It's great that this system of science, philosophy, and movement from ancient India has reached the entire planet. That's beautiful because you and I here live in North America. So yes, what hurts my heart and a lot of us serious practitioners is that the word yoga is associated with tight pants and sports bras and handstands and pretzels, pretzel positions. And that's wonderful. That people taking care of their bodies and doing things that they may not have been able to do, months or years ago. That's wonderful. But yoga is so much more than that. There is a perspective of life that is available through practicing shifting your consciousness that comes from the psychology and philosophy of yoga that people don't recognize as part of an integral part of the system because of what is flooded to them in images and things from social media. So when most people see yoga, they see people doing, dripping sweat and doing a, Parsvatasana, a side angle pose, and holding this rigid pose for 5 minutes. That's that's a part of the path, but it's a very, very small part. And there's
Right.
so much more that if people had the if there was more interest in folks like you and I to show people that there's so much more to this pathway than just moving your body. That's a wonderful part of it. But to circle back around, post-traumatic stress disorder, if I could tell anyone what we could do for them with yoga and yoga therapy, there's three things. There's awareness to see the patterns of behavior that are disrupting your life. There's regulation. There's creating safety in building new patterns. And then we build the new patterns, we repattern. So awareness, regulation, and repattern. First, we have to notice that we're struggling, that something is causing us stress. Then we create safety around it. We don't blame ourselves. We don't think that something is wrong with us. We just notice that there's something that needs to change.
Right.
Once we notice that, then we make that change. And it doesn't have to be this giant leap. It's little steps. It's little small steps. And that's going to make the biggest change in anybody's life.
Yeah, cumulative short steps creates a longer sustainable chitta vritti that can create some balance in the person and not create and kind of erode the previous samskara so that you create new habits like you've been saying, and so that will create that new bound disorder breaking cycle is our attempt to create that cycle.
Absolutely. And in today's, if this is the take home message for me, if you talk to me about this, is in today's world, in our, in the Ashtanga yoga, the eightfold path of yoga from Patanjali, there's the word Pratyahara, which is
Pratyahara, yes.
which is most of our life is spent scanning the outside, the material objects of the world. We need food, we need places to survive, we need shelter, we need to take care of our families. All of that is out here. Pratyahara is starting to shift a little bit of that back inside. That in our modern world, and not that it's a bad thing, not that anybody has caused this to happen, it's just the way that it is.
Well, the senses work out. The senses are built into the, like circling back to your first statement, the body is meant to keep itself alive, and the senses' job is to go, okay, what can I see? What can I hear? What can I taste? What can I smell? So that if it's anything is threatening, I'm going to protect myself. So you're right. I mean, they go out, and that's circling back to your very first statement, basically, and that's the human response, and then the pratyahara response that we introduce. Like, that's great that you introduced that into this discussion as the original yoga that India developed and that Patanjali developed. And so that's great that 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 remembrance of not just the asana, which is only one part of that, but physical motion is obviously important, but the pratyahara, the yama niyama also, and all the way of life and the development also has to go into that. So, and thank you. Do you have any closing things you want to add that you haven't had the opportunity to talk about in a minute or so?
Yeah, I think just realizing that we need to we move from elimination of these patterns to updating the patterns, these patterns of behavior that cause stress. And really the pratyahara, the starting to direct a little sensory awareness inside. I think in our world today, we've lost a lot of the contact with our inner feelings, our inner experiences. We're limited so much to, maybe I'm hungry or I'm tired or I'm happy or I'm sad. There's so much more that's going on the inside. And
Mm.
if we can start to reduce those distractions from the outside, turn off the news, turn off social media, turn off, anything that's a distraction. Simple analogy, take driving down, a dirt road and a horse and a carriage 150 years ago. All that's around you is trees and maybe a couple of, things here and there. Nowadays, drive down a modern road and there's blue signs, red signs, stop signs, cars. There's so much that's pulling our attention at all times
Yeah,
that we've gotten desensitized to it.
right.
And we have to we have to regulate ourselves. Nobody's going to come and save us. You have to, as the Buddha says, be a light unto yourself.
And that's been the yoga principle from Patanjali from the get-go, the actual teaching, and you pointed this out in a previous statement. We both referred to it, is that the yoga, the original yoga, is about how you can cure yourself with whatever it is that's causing you to not respond to the point where your happiness has been affected, if you want to put it that way. But the who you are is something that is been affected. Who you are is something that's more joyful than maybe you allowing yourself to be. And if there's something that's getting in the way, then that yoga principle of being able to take care of yourself. So thank you for referring to that. That's amazing. So thank you so much for your time, your valued knowledge on this topic, which, we all need to know. As I said, all of us on the planet right now are struggling with some kind of a stress disorder, whatever nature that be. So your comments and conversation are very valuable. So I want to thank you for your time and thank you for your knowledge base for sharing this with us. And I will put your contact information in the comment section and description of this video so that people can contact you for further information. Thank you so much, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.